Welcome, everyone. This is our third of 3 webinars for this year, put on together by ADFO, CPCO, and OPC. These webinars are with a focus of autism spectrum disorder. When the term principal is used within our presentation today, we absolutely mean principals and vice principals, any of us that are members of ADFO, CPCO, and OPC. In webinar 1, we discussed what is autism spectrum disorder, the prevalence, level of severity, and leadership approaches. In webinar 2, we gave you an overview of PPM 140, incorporating the methods of applied behavior analysis, which is ABA, into programs for students with autism spectrum disorder. In this webinar, we're going to look further at the collaborative approach to support students with autism spectrum disorder. To ensure the best possible learning experience and engagement for this webinar, please allow for 45 minutes of your time with an opportunity for follow-up questions. As we move through this webinar, please reflect on who's on your team, and is there an opportunity to expand this team to include various perspectives in support of students with ASD in your school. To begin, we appreciate that people are coming from all over the province, which is really exciting for us. So we will say this land acknowledgement together, recognizing that we have many different groups represented across the province. So ADFO, CPCO, and OPC would like to acknowledge the enduring presence of Indigenous people on the lands in which we gather today across Ontario. And we thank the past, present, and future caretakers of this land. These lands are gathering points where age-old ceremonies of celebration, initiation, and renewal took place. The principal associations are grateful to have the opportunity to work and learn on these lands in a community of sharing. Today's presentation talks about the village. We know the saying, the African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. It means that an entire community of people must interact with children for those children to experience and grow in a safe and healthy environment. The villagers always look out for the children. Elaine Hall took this proverb a step further. It takes a child with autism to raise the consciousness of the village. From the learnings from webinar 1 and 2, what do you think the author means by this? Please submit your ideas using chat. I wonder if children and youth with autism help us to identify how well our team is working collaboratively together. When you're working to support children and youth with complex needs, the cracks within our team will reveal themselves. Knowing how to pull the team together and how to identify what supports they need to create positive change is our work as school leaders. In today's webinar, which is the third of 3, we're really going to focus on that village. But we can't focus on the whole village today in the 45 minutes that we have. So we're going to start by looking at students and parents, their guardians and/or supports. Future webinars will look at the rest of the village, so school-based teams, multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary teams, our community partners, that might include therapists, faith groups, and we want to focus on siblings as well in future years. Today, though, it's that village. Think about your village in your school. Who is the village? How do you, as a principal or vice principal, embrace this village? Are there members of the village that may need more effort to embrace? Reflect on this and why this may be. So the OLF is where we base all of our development from, because as leaders, we use the OLF. So this webinar supports the development of the leadership practices, particularly those including the building relationships and developing people column. It also supports the application of the personal leadership resources, particularly problem-solving expertise and knowledge of effective school and classroom practices that directly affect student learning. So in addition to those core leadership capacities of the OLF, research tells us that the school principal has the influential role in fostering a welcoming and supportive class and school environment. So think about that. How can you, as a principal or vice principal, foster inclusive schools for students with special education needs? We know that relationships are foundational to the special education supports that are put in place. We also know that communication is a key leadership skill that we need to employ in order to successfully support all students in the school. Principals model the type of behavior that they desire for the entire school community. So today's webinar really focuses on collaboration. You can't talk about team without talking about collaboration. No one person holds all of the information. That's a bit of a relief for us as principals and vice principals. We don't need to know it all, but we do need to know who our team is and who we can bring into the conversation to help us problem solve and help move the students' learning forward. We rely on the different perspectives and expertise to serve our students with ASD and their families. The quote on this slide reminds us, most importantly, that we need to work with our students and families. In the next slide, Stefan is going to talk about how we work as a team.
All right, as you can see on this slide, collaboration is very important, especially when we work with children with autism. When we talk about collaboration, it's more a partnership approach. So that means that all members of the team should have the same level of opportunities to share, to make recommendation, and also to be able to question any objective or any observation data that people have collected. That's really important, because sometimes I hear that people will say, yeah, we did collaborate, but then when you look at what's happening, it's one or two person that's really controlling the meeting. So when we look at supporting children or students with ASD, there's been a nice evolution within the education world. When we look back at first, and it's still around, and I'll explain why, and we need to really think about moving on. We used to always refer to expert. For many years in the school system, they were referring to the expert model. So each time we wanted to learn about a child, we would ask, for example, a psychologist to assess, to come to the school and do an assessment, and then that person would meet with the parents and the school and share their results. This expert model really left hardly any space to parents for asking questions, for asking how that evaluation would help their child within a school environment, and would also limit opportunities for either a teacher or a school principal, any member of that school, to question why did the expert use certain tools? What are the negative effects of that evaluation? Did we learn something new? Because what's happening is a lot of the placement and a lot of the services offered to children with autism, they always depend on what an expert is going to say. So that really needs to change, because once a child is diagnosed with autism, we know that all the developmental domains are affected. So we should be able through nice observation to identify objectives for that child. So that expert model gradually expanded to what we used to call multidisciplinary. So these were people from different disciplines, could have been a speech language pathologist, a resource teacher, the school principal, a psychologist, where they would meet and work together, but also always trying to argue from within their own discipline. So that wasn't really focusing on problem solving, but more bringing an expert opinion about what that person, what were their theoretical background, for example. So this became more of a disciplinary theory development. So everybody was trying to prove a point. But the bottom line is there were hardly any common vision where people could identify what's next. And we still see that often, and I'm part of that too. Sometimes I'll go in and I'll meet with the team after based on the observation. This is what I would recommend, and then so often it goes against what somebody else has already recommended. So the multidisciplinary approach, unfortunately, will have that impact, and that confuses teacher. And teachers need for us to be more direct and more supportive by providing them with strategies that they can apply within the classroom. So that's really, that was used a lot, and I still see it. Where we're at today, we're more into what we call the interdisciplinary approach. So where this is very interesting and important is we're now, rather than talk about different theories and everybody trying to pull the blanket and say, oh, I know what autism is and I know how to deal with children with autism. Everybody brings their knowledge, but we're using more of the synthesis approach, meaning that we will take all the information from all the discipline, analyze all of that, and then decide based on problem solving what would be the best approach for that child. So that really brings a more direct level of cooperation where I've seen when I was working with certain kids, and if I saw now if I see that the speech language pathologist is already involved, then I will support that person, let them do their work, and then based on the outcome, then we will meet and decide what would be the next step. So everybody's got a voice, but it's not everybody that's going to work at the same time. And everybody will be kept in the loop about who's doing what, when, how, and why. And that also includes the parents and the child that's really are in the center of all our decision. In the best of world, we hear now more and more the concept transdisciplinary. So what's really important with that model, where I feel that it involves school principals way more, is it's when you create a unity of intellectual frameworks. That means that everybody, including people that are making the decision, it could be the director of education, it could be the superintendent. I deal often with all these people and we have amazing conversation, but it involves a unit there where we go and find the people that are with the best knowledge of autism, for example, but also the best people that can implement the strategies to offer the best services around. So we're talking at that point more of a team that really includes also people making decisions. It's really based on problem solving. It also involves different discipline, and it also involves the parents that are part of that. So we're always looking for new knowledge. So whatever you already know about the child, then that team will work more on what do we need to know, what do we need to find out, how are we going to do that, and in which environment are we going to do it. And so that means that the transdisciplinary, I foresee it coming in the near future, where they're going to create a very specific individual, where it could be a vice principal that has that responsibility of having their team under them, where specifically working with children with autism.
Thanks, Stefan. So if we move into looking at our village, and let's start with the student. So student as partner, have you thought of them that way? So the first thing we want to look at is student agency. So student agency refers to the level of control, autonomy, and power that a student experiences in the educational setting. Student agency can be manifested in the choice of the learning environment, choice of subject matter, choice of approach, and/or pace. If we're working with a student as partner and they're part of our village, they're always at the center of decisions, and they have input and voice into those decisions. As much as possible, as a principal or vice principal, we must provide opportunities for students to communicate their needs and to set their own goals. Think about your students with ASD in your school. When do you invite them into IEP meetings, transition meetings, or their own IPRC? What's holding you back from inviting them in if you don't? What barriers might be at play? On the next slide, we know this image of the Iceberg Model. We've seen it before. Take a look at that. Is the student's observable behavior interfering with why we might not be inviting their voice into the conversation? Perhaps it's the aggression or their what appears like refusal or non-compliance. Have we thought about the underlying reasons for these observable iceberg, above the water surface behaviors that we see? How are we inviting student voice into that conversation? Again, with the Iceberg Model, when we're looking at opportunities to provide voice, how can we be creative to ensure that students do have voice to their own learning and their goals? We want to provide as many pathways and opportunities as possible for students to have voice. Remember that notion of with, not to. Sarah's put up the slide about student voice. So here's quotes directly from students in the London District Catholic School Board. And when we talked about these quotes, the committee believed that these quotes are representative of any of our students across the province. So let's look at a few of those. I like the one in the middle, talk to me, not around me. So students tell us this, or maybe their behavior tells us this. How many times do we walk into the school or into a classroom and who's the first person that we talk to? And if it is the student, who's responding? Is it an adult around the student, or are we giving the student space and time to communicate back to us in whatever way that means? I like the green one at the bottom as well. Don't get in the way of independent efforts. I think this one resonates with me because I have to constantly remind myself that students are in our buildings and they're learning. They're learning through social or academic ways. And is it my need for being quicker that I open the door up for the student? Is it my own need of, I need you out on the yard because the recess bell rang, so I'm going to tie your shoe, versus allowing you the opportunity to, number one, open the door yourself, or number two, ask me to open the door for you, which is an important skill of advocacy, or allow you to learn to tie your shoes on your own. So we have to really watch, how are we helping kids and to whose benefit is that? I like when kids tell us, give us control. Don't take all of our control away from us. So these are just some examples of student voice that we need to consider. Likewise, as we move into talking about parents or guardians or their supports as part of our village, we'll need to look at their quotes in just a moment as well. So in their quotes, here are some of the things that, again, parent mentors from the Thames Valley Children's Centre, which is located in London, have shared with us that they've heard from their parents. Again, we feel this is representative across the province. Number one, parents don't sign up for this. Parents don't have a baby and say, oh, I hope that when they go to school, I get to have all these meetings with the school team. I hope that I'll just move to the next quote. I lost my train of thought. Actually, I'll go back, Sarah, to that, the quotes though. Advocacy is hard and it's exhausting. No one's wanting to have to be in the school and feel that they have to advocate for their student or their child as hard as some of our parents do. This is their normal. I also don't make school problems parents' problems. We do hear that. And we make school problems parents' problems when we talk to them about the resources that we have available to us. That's not their concern. They just want to know and be reassured that we have their child's best interests forefront. Figuring out how you do the resource support, how you allocate all the other resources or people you have in your buildings, that's not a parent's problem. So don't make our school problems parents' problems. And it's all about priorities. I like that quote in the sense of, how often do we find ourselves judging our parents? Oh, they didn't come for that IPRC meeting again. Oh, were unable to attend this again. Some of our parents have so many healthcare and other professionals and appointments that they need to attend to. Forget about them trying to hold down their own work or their place at work. So it's all about priorities for them. They're doing the best they can. So if we move to the next slide, and we all know that it's working together is always better. So parents as our partners, everything in research tells us that that's a win-win for us. So the focus is, again, are we working with our parents or to our parents? And what we mean by that is, if you're setting up a problem-solving meeting or a meeting, to would mean that you're bringing parents into a meeting with a planned outcome already decided. How many times do we do that? Versus if we're working with our parents, we're bringing people to the table. We're sharing a concern at the meeting. We're inviting voice so that everyone can be part of the authentic problem solving to reach a solution. And as we know, our job is to create a welcoming and safe place for parents to participate in the educational planning of their children. So the perspectives of the parents is really important for us to begin to understand. And so the next few slides will really be about that. How do we know our parents? How do we know what they're experiencing? And obviously they know their child best. So how are we using that information to help us? This resource on the next slide is such a powerful resource. It's been around since 2007, but I would ask you to find it again. And if you can't, take a look at the online copy. So the resource was designed to support educators in elementary and secondary school in planning and implementing effective educational programs for students with autism and spectrum disorders. It contains information about strategies and practices that can be put into use in the school and in the classroom. When working with parents in partnership, it's important to keep in mind that parents are on their own journey of acceptance of the diagnosis and its significant impact for both their own lives and the life of their child. Having a child with ASD is a challenge for any family, and maybe an emotional, physical, or have a financial impact on the family. The impact on families can vary considerably across situations. Some families are able to cope with these additional stressors. However, for others, it can be very difficult. It's important that we don't make assumptions about what we are seeing from parents. We don't know where the parent is on that journey, nor the stressors that they have in their life at the moment of time that we happen to interact with them. And Stefan's going to speak further to that in just a bit. So in this quote, we see that advocacy is hard and exhausting. Think about what that means. Think about some of the interactions that you've had with parents. When can you see that exhaustion coming out of our parents? And I wonder, how can we turn that into a positive stance for parents? How do we turn advocacy into a positive stance? The next slide, again, we're looking at that iceberg. And sometimes it looks like our parents are presenting through anger. But our role as school leaders is to look beyond the anger. Let's look below the surface. And what are those emotions if we look deeper to better understand our parents' perspective? I try to remind myself that people that I interact with are presenting their best selves at any given moment. So presuming that the parent, even though it may look like anger, is presenting their best selves, how can we then, as principals and vice principals, show compassion and to help our staff show compassion and to also see beyond the emotion that's being presented? It's our responsibility as principals and vice principals to seek a relationship with the parents and to work in partnership. Again, we really need to see beyond the emotion. We need to use our personal leadership resources, as we talked about in the Ontario Leadership Framework, to help us to move towards more productive partnerships. This slide shares, again, a parent's perspective, and it was one that really resonated with me. Working in the school is like working with your in-laws. You didn't choose each other, but you care about someone in common. And I think that's the key point. We need to keep the focus on the student, and if we're doing that, how can we work in compassion with the parents? The parents play a vital role in the education of their children. We know this. As partners in the process, parents can provide perspectives and information that will broaden educators' understanding of the student. Parent participation will enhance program planning and assist in the determination of educational goals, methods, and motivational strategies that are most appropriate and effective for the student. In the next few slides, Stefan's going to share a little bit more about advocacy and collaboration and how to bring voice so that everyone can work together in the benefit of the student.
I always talk, because I've been working in the field for so many years. There is a comment that I get a lot from parents. It's, why do they need to be advocate, and why can't they just collaborate with the school team? There is a difference. You know, I always say, and I've seen it while working with both parents and professional. If you're in a position of having to advocate all the time, then it's really, you're always in a position of defending the rights of your child or the children with regards to service. We see that often when we get to a meeting. I've been asked to attend this meeting, or somebody from the community agency sitting around the table and making sure that the parent has a voice, or that advocate will talk for the parent, especially for the IPRC, or even when they're dealing with the IEPs. So the more you have to be in this frame of mind where you have to be a strong advocate and always seek support through the media, or filing an official complaint to the regional rep for the Ministry of Education. So that really tarnished the relationship between the parents and the rest of the team, because there always is a wall built between, for example, the teacher and the parent, because the teacher is afraid that the parents is going to disagree with everything, or the parent doesn't have any trust in the teacher, so they will ask report daily, they will ask for somebody else to come do observation in the school. So if we want to create collaboration, we need to make sure that we put all the tools in our box with regards to collaboration, because collaboration asks for us to be more child-centered, which gives a voice to the parents with regard to placement and services. So the parent and child are active participant in all the decision with regards to services. So they don't get to the IPRC and you have everybody sitting across the table and they try to convince. They will ask with the parents what they were hoping for, and then they will build from that. So there should be multiple meetings with regards to the prep, the pre and the post, but also while everything is put together. Keep that in mind, because if not, if the parent has to be a strong advocate, if they can't do it because they feel insecure, they will bring people that will do it. And that really has a negative impact on any form of relationship that could happen between the family and the school system.
So Stefan just spoke to that concept of with, not to. In this slide, we continue to look at our opportunities for collaboration with parents. We know that parents provide valuable information about many of the key aspects and how a student participates at school, such as the developmental history of that child, the health issues, the range of professionals that have been or are still involved with the student. Parents know their child best, their likes, their dislikes, their special interests, and certainly their sensory sensitivities. Parents can really help us too with effective positive reinforcers and motivators. It's important to keep in mind the home and school communication for many students with ASD. It's a method of reporting for students who, because of the nature of their disability, cannot do this for themselves. So thinking about how does the school communicate with the home? This can have a significant impact on the quality of the relationship between home and school. School staff need to meet the parent's needs. Discuss with the parent what method of communication do they want, what's needed on a daily basis. And certainly, the classroom teacher is responsible for this communication. It shouldn't be delegated to an educational assistant. Generally, parents want to know about the activities that their child's participated in during the day. Parents can use this information then to talk and elicit communication responses whenever possible in the evening. Information in this communication book could include activities that the student participated in, any new or particular skill that was demonstrated during the day, the nature of play with their friends and classmates, perhaps a song or a story. Maybe it's about a special event coming up or a snack day that's coming up. Remember to report positive information as often as possible. And have you as a principal or vice principal gone in and take a look at the communication that's been going back and forth? Is it positive? Because this communication can have such a significant impact on the quality of the family's evening or perhaps their weekend. In most situations, it really is unnecessary to report on the daily incidences of non-compliance or off-task behavior if these are typical and ongoing in that child's behavioral profile. We do know that if there is a significant behavioral occurrence, that we do need to report that to the parent. But that shouldn't be through the communication book. And really, it's best if the principal was the one that shares that information and assumes that important role to allow the classroom teacher and the the parent communication to stay in that positive place. Again, think about that communication book and how is it being used? Is it being given to parents as a point of celebration, a point of hope, a point of new learning, things that they can just celebrate in? Because parents with children with ASD have layers and layers of stressors that they're working through on a daily basis. And we don't know in that given moment, on that given day, when the parent opens up that communication book, how that glimmer of hope can really lift their day and turn things around. Stefan's going to talk in the next few slides about some of the stressors that parents are living with. It's just to provide us through research what we know so that we as principals and vice principals can certainly use that information to really focus on compassion when we work with parents. So here's Stefan again.
Also, what I need everybody to understand, especially for school and principal and vice principal, when we're talking about autism, we're talking about a lot of need for support for parents. When we look at everything they have to deal with, a lot of kids on the spectrum, for example, they don't sleep. So they have really self-regulation issues with sleeping. So they might spend the entire night up and running around and crying and really, so there is a lot of issues that these families are facing. So if they get to the school and all you're talking about is how bad their child is, that's nothing to make them feel good. And that is not a way to get the parents to collaborate. There's 6% higher divorce rate within the population of autism. That's even when you look within other disorders. Autism is the highest when it comes to the divorce rate. So that means often the mom is raising her kid by themselves. What we've seen is often the father, because the majority are boys, the father is not able to deal with the grief of having a boy that is autistic. So 78% report that they were divorced after their child was diagnosed. 76% report that autism was not the primary cause of divorce, but because there's the level of demand from that child, often it will also create, because if you don't have good communication within the relationship, if it's not a shared relationship where the dad is as involved as the mom with the education of the kids, that also will play. The financial component of it really plays, and 50% report that autism was a contributing factor in the divorce. So it's really important. I think it was a great call for the team to bring that information, because often you get parents, you know, coming in to the IPRC, and sometimes I'll hear comments like, "Oh my God, like they're really blunt, or they're tough, and they're not open to anything." They have to deal with so much every day, and they're dealing with their child, 24 hours a day. Yes, they're in school, but the rest is often the worst when they get back home. There's also what we call the broader phenotype in autism. So what we see through research is the mothers, they will report a high level of psychological distress, depressive symptoms, and social isolation. So what's hard to figure out, because there's research that shows us that some of the moms were already predisposed to depression or obsessive compulsive disorder or a major anxiety, but we also see in other research where the diagnosis itself led to clinical depression or led to major anxiety because out of the fear, because their child is nonverbal, so they worry about their kid. They start thinking about what's going to happen when I'm not around, who's going to take care of my child. So 40% reported clinically significant levels of parenting stress, and between 33 and 59% reported experiencing significant depressive symptoms. So again, if we look at mental illness, if we know that somebody that's already depressed, when they have to face a group of people and talk about their child, often their concentration is affected, the level of anxiety is high, they will have a cognitive distortion, so they might do a false interpretation of your message. They might see only thinking that everybody's talking negatively. They might look at you across the table and feeling that they're being judged. So they'll do what we call mental thinking of the other, so they'll get very uncomfortable. So it's really important to keep in mind that when you're communicating, especially for a school principal, keep in mind that that's a reality when it comes to parents on the spectrum. Some of the major challenges is a lot of parents, they're waiting a long time to get the diagnosis. Once they get the diagnosis, often the support's not there right away. There's a lack of treatment services. And it's really hard for them to be in a position where they have to work with the education system. They often will have unmet needs, financial support. How many parents will go to the bank to get a second mortgage just to find money to be able to provide intensive behavior intervention for their child? The social networks is very rare. The first people often that really take a step back often will be family members, especially if the child is very aggressive and all that. Often they're not invited as much anymore. There's some distance being happening there. Also, often they will join organization like Autism Ontario or Geneva or any other. But that's one thing I think in the near future we need to rethink is how can we create social networks where it's not just to advocate for services, but also to provide more direct care for the parents. They don't have breaks from responsibilities. Even if they get respite money, often they get babysitters to come in, and often the people don't stay long. The rest, sleep is affected, but also a lot of them, they remain hopeful. That's why they've been fighting all these years for ABA, because they truly believe that their child can progress, they can reach their milestones. It happens with some, but even with the best treatment, if you look at the Lovaas method, was only about 47% of the kids that at the end of the treatment that really were independent. A lot of these kids will remain dependent on the adults. And that's something that we need to figure out because it's causing major headaches for the school system. That's why parents are always asking for EAs, because their child is dependent on the adult. So you need to ask these questions, what kind of service, what kind of teaching were they receiving? Did they have opportunities to be around other kids? Because if not, often they're really good one-on-one, but that really limits their potential. That really limits independence. And unfortunately, right now, a lot of young adults with autism end up in group home because they can't be independent. So if the purpose for treatment is to bring them to the best of their potential and be independent, we need to change something in the system right now, because right now we're reinforcing the dependency and that's a major issue.
Thanks, Stefan. And as Stefan talks about, he brings that research component to our webinars so that we can take a look at that with our lived experience with families, perhaps have a deeper understanding of those other layers and complexities that families are inevitably dealing with. Going back to our documents, though, provided by the Ministry of Education, they're available to help us to establish that parent and school team partnership. So again, how can we turn advocacy into that positive stance for parents and their children? And we know that their focus is to advocate for the child's best interests. So it's essential that we have opportunities to be involved, inviting our parents in as partners for the ongoing planning and review of educational programs for their child or our students with ASD. That strong partnership between schools and families, it's foundational for a student's ongoing success and their experiences, their positive experiences at school. So again, as we started, we talked about the Ontario Leadership Framework. It's important for us as principals and vice principals to reopen this document and be reflective and use especially the personal leadership resource page as a reflective tool for us. What resources are you using when you're working with your families and your staff who are working with families? Think about the cognitive resources that you might be using, that you use to help maintain calm in the face of a challenging or angry parent. Maybe you're drawing on your social resources, managing your emotions by reflecting on your own emotional responses. Or perhaps it's psychological. How are you using your optimism or your resiliency or your ability to be proactive? Reflect on this the next time you're presented with a family or your school team, your staff, who are struggling with working with families who have children with ASD. The next slide invites you to think about, take some time, think about what strategies do you offer to ensure that parents have the information that they need in a timely way. We know that responsive and responsible reporting of the events of a student's day at school makes such a positive contribution to both the home and the school experience. We know that parents feel informed and supported and more able to support the learning needs of their child with a strong communication between school and home. So what are those strategies you're using? One thing I want you to consider, if you are using a communication book as that means of daily communication between the classroom teacher and the home, take a look at that book. Every once in a while, go in and read what's in that book and think about if that book were to ever become lost or found by another student or a stranger, would the child or family's dignity or their privacy be compromised? Just something to think about and reflect on. So today's webinar was really focusing on the village, and there are many, many members of that village. Today's purposes, we looked at the village of the student and the village of the parents and guardians as members of that village. But we do need to consider all of the other people that are part of that village as well, that as principals and vice principals, we're grateful for. We don't have to hold all the information and the responsibility alone with learning to work collaboratively with everybody to meet the needs of a student with ASD. The village can be quite large. So in succeeding years of these webinar series, we'll take a look at the other members that can be part of that village. So finally, we just want to thank you. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to work with you, to learn with you, for being interested in the webinar series with us. As we said earlier in the series, this is the first year of a 3-year project that OPC, ADFO, and CPCO have with the ministries. So we're excited to come back to you in succeeding years and send you some information or watch your association website so that you can see when those next webinars will be available for you. So again, my name is Judith Desjardins. I thank you for being with myself and with Stefan, and certainly Sarah in the background that helps navigate it all. We thank you very much.